The island of Sodor is surrounded by beautiful blue sea. It has fields of green and sandy yellow beaches. There are rivers, streams, and lots of trees where the birds sing. There are windmills and a coal mine, and docks where visitors to the island arrive. The island also has lots and lots of railway lines. Who's that puffing down the track? It's Thomas! Hello, Thomas! Hello, everybody! Welcome to the island of Sodor. The island of Sodor is a very special place. It has hills and valleys, fields and forests. All of came to Tid. It will be put on show at Knapford Station, boomed Sir Topham Hatt. Percy, you must collect the artist from Brendam Docks and show him all the most beautiful places. Yes, sir, said Percy. Thomas was excited for his friend, but Percy was worried. What's the spirit of Sodor? Asked Percy. Thomas thought. Everything that is special about the island, he said. No one knows the island better than you, he said. The docks were very crowded. Everyone wanted to see the famous artist. He had paper and an easel. He had pots of paint and bags of brushes, a long smock to keep his clothes clean, and on his head he wore a big black beret. Percy thought he looked very important. The famous artist climbed on board Percy. I want to see the spirit of Sodor, he said. Please show me somewhere special. Yes, sir, puffed Percy happily. And he steamed out of the docks as fast as he could go. Percy puffed across the island and valley. It was very beautiful. There you are, sir, cried Percy happily. The spirit of Sodor. The famous artist had a very long look. Too green, he said. I want you to show me somewhere special. Percy was surprised. He thought Shen Valley was very special. But the artist was very famous and very important.
Those with Robin Hood gold can enjoy it.
Maybe Shen Valley isn't special after all. Percy came to Normanby Beach. The sun was shining. Children were playing in the sand. There was even a donkey giving rides. Percy was sure the famous artist would want to paint it. Here we are, sir, he puffed. All the children love Normanby Beach. The famous artist looked at Normanby Beach. He held his paintbrush and palette. The sand is too yellow, he sighed. I want you to show me somewhere special. This upset Percy. He thought Normanby Beach was the most cheerful place on the island. He wanted to tell the famous artist he was wrong. But all he said was, yes, sir, and set off sadly again. Percy took the artist to the viaduct. But the famous artist said, too tall. Then Percy took him to the windmill. Too round, said the famous artist. Finally, Percy took the famous artist to Knapford Station. There were engines and coaches, porters with packages, and loudest of all, the happy noise of passengers coming and going. Percy thought it was the most wonderful sight of all. Here, sir, said Percy proudly. Isn't this the spirit of Sodor? Too busy, the famous artist sighed. Why, I do believe there is nothing special to paint on this island at all. Percy was so cross his boiler bubbled, and he went as red as James. Gordon thought the artist was very rude. Everywhere on Sodor is special, peeped Percy, and so are the people and the children and the engines. We are all special. Then he wheezed some steam. His steam blew the artist's hat into the air. I want to see Sir Topham Hatt right away, the famous artist cried. Percy was sure he was in trouble now. Percy waited and worried. Sir Topham Hatt came to Knapford at once. I have found the perfect thing to paint, cried the famous artist. What is it? Asked Sir Topham Hatt. I am going to paint Percy. Bust my buffers, Percy gasped. You want to paint me? Percy is honest, hard-working, and helpful, and he is not afraid to speak his mind. He is surely the spirit of Sodor, said the famous artist. And Sir Topham Hatt agreed. And so the famous artist painted Percy. And on the night the painting was to be shown for the first time, all the engines were there. When the mayor pulled a cord to show his picture, Percy gasped. I told you you were the best engine for the job, Thomas smiled. And Percy smiled too. He was very proud to be the spirit of Sodor. Thomas has friends all over the island of Sodor.
Toots and huffs and puffs. Edward wants to help and share. Toby, well, let's say he's square. Two, there, four, there, six, there, eight. Two, there, four, there, six, there, eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All with different roles to play. Round in the sheds so far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and his friends.
Thomas has friends all over the island of Sodor. Friends at Brendam Docks. And friends at the farm. All of the engines are Thomas's friends. And so are all of the children. One night, there had been a summer storm on the island. Sir Topham Hatt came to Tidmouth Sheds. He looked very serious. A strong wind has blown down the telephone lines, he said. Thomas? Then Thomas noticed something in the sky. Thomas thought it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Look at all those colors, Edward, gasped Thomas. Red and blue and yellow and green. That's a rainbow, puffed Edward wisely. An old story says you'll find something magical at the end of a rainbow. Something magical, gasped Thomas. That sounds wonderful. I must find the end of the rainbow right away. And he wheeshed away as fast as he could. Thomas had to stop at a junction. The rainbow was overhead. Percy was already waiting there. Thomas puffed up Gordon's hill. The end of the rainbow was just over the top. But when Thomas reached the top, the end of the rainbow had moved. "Bother," said Thomas. Thomas had to let some engineers off at the bridge. He could see the rainbow up ahead. Children on the bridge waved to Thomas and called hello. Thomas just shuffled away. "Sorry, no time to talk," he puffed. "I have to find the end of the rainbow." Thomas took the telephone engineers all across the island. Over the hills and through the valleys. All the time he was looking for the end of the rainbow. "Must find the end. Must find the end," he puffed. When Thomas passed Henry, Henry asked him for some help. "Sorry," cried Thomas. "I don't have time to stop. I'm looking for the end of the rainbow." But the end of the rainbow was always just around the corner. Finally, Thomas passed Toby. "Slow down, Thomas," Toby cried. "There's something ahead on your tracks." But Thomas wasn't listening. He was sure the end of the rainbow was just around the corner. And then there was trouble. Thomas hit the telegraph pole, and they all came off the tracks. Luckily, no one was hurt. "Cinders and ashes!" Thomas cried. Thomas was stuck. His driver couldn't phone for help. The telephone lines were still not working. Then Thomas spotted Percy far away. "Help!" cried Thomas. "Percy! Help!" And he whistled as loudly as he could. Thomas watched sadly as Percy puffed away. "Percy isn't talking to me because I didn't have time to talk to him," thought Thomas. "I was too busy chasing the end of the rainbow." Thomas knew it was his fault. But Percy had heard Thomas's whistle. He knew Thomas was in trouble, and he was hurrying to get help. "Thomas is in trouble!" Percy called out as he passed Henry. Then Henry told Bertie the bus. And Bertie told the children. The children told James. James told Harold the helicopter. And Harold the helicopter told Harvey. Harvey set off right away. Harvey found Thomas in no time at all. Soon he had them all back on the tracks. "Thank you for rescuing us, Harvey," said Thomas. Harvey told Thomas how the message had been passed on. "All of your friends have helped rescue you," he said. Thomas was very happy indeed. Thomas puffed along. The rainbow was still in the sky. But Thomas didn't try to find the end of the rainbow. He worked as hard as he could until all the telephones were working again. As Thomas returned to Tidmouth Sheds, he was amazed to find the end of the rainbow. It was right over Tidmouth Sheds. "The old story was right," gasped Thomas. "There is something magical at the end of the rainbow. My friends. Friends are the most wonderful thing of all." Thomas's Milkshake Muddle.
Shunting trucks and hauling freight, red and green and brown
Thomas's milkshake muddle. Once a year, the children of Sodor are all invited to a special summer party. There was to be ice cream and cake for everyone. Every engine wanted to be the one to take the children to the party. On the day of the party, Sir Topham Hatt came to Tidmouth Sheds. Thomas hoped that he would be taking the children. But Sir Topham Hatt chose Emily. He had other jobs for Thomas. Thomas, first you are to go to the dairy to collect milk to make the ice cream. Then you must go to the farm on the other side of the island to collect butter for cakes. All in time for the children's party. Thomas set off proudly. When Thomas arrived at the dairy, the manager told him he was to take the milk churns to the ice cream factory. You have to go very slowly, he told Thomas. So Thomas steamed carefully away. When Thomas stopped at a signal, he met Emily. Hello, slow coach, she whistled. I'm not being a slow coach, huffed Thomas. I'm being reliable. If you weren't a slow coach, Emily sniffed, Sir Topham Hatt would have given you my job. I'm fast and I'm reliable. That's why I'm taking the children. Emily looked very pleased with herself. This made Thomas cross. I can be as fast as you, he huffed. I'll race you to the next signal, Emily whistled, and she steamed quickly away. Thomas wheeshed after her as fast as his pistons would pump. As he raced along, the milk churns rattled and rocked. They biffed and bashed. And at the next signal, Thomas raced ahead of Emily. Thomas was very pleased. He steamed off for the ice cream factory. But he had completely forgotten about going slowly. The ice cream factory manager was very happy. Thomas had delivered the milk in record time. Now the factory could make the ice cream for the party. But when the manager looked into one of the churns, he was very surprised. This milk is almost butter, exclaimed the manager. The factory manager asked Thomas if the churns had rattled around. Thomas looked worried. If you shake milk for long enough, it turns to butter, he told Thomas. Thomas was very upset. The factory manager was cross. You must go back to the dairy and get more milk. And remember to go slowly this time, he said sternly. Thomas steamed back to the dairy as fast as he could. When Thomas arrived back at the dairy, Sir Topham Hatt was there. He was very cross. Thomas, it is nearly time for the party, and you still have not collected the butter from the other side of the island. The children will have no cakes for the party. Thomas felt terrible. Thomas trundled slowly and carefully back to the ice cream factory. He didn't feel reliable. He had let everyone down. When he finally arrived with the milk, the manager told Thomas to take the old churns back to the dairy. But suddenly, Thomas had a better idea. Thomas steamed along with the milk churns even faster than he had before. He huffed up Gordon's Hill and chuffed down to the valley. He raced like a rocket, and he wheeshed like the wind. The churns in Thomas's freight cars rattled and rolled. They clanked and crashed, and biffed and bashed. Even the cows and sheep looked up to see what the noise was. But Thomas couldn't stop until he got to the bakery. As he arrived, he blew his whistle long and hard. "I need butter, not milk!" cried the baker. He was surprised to see the milk churns. "Look inside the churns," tooted Thomas. The baker couldn't believe his eyes. The almost butter was now butter, enough to make all the cakes for the party. Sir Topham Hatt heard what Thomas had done. He came to see him. Thomas thought Sir Topham Hatt would be cross. He was very worried. But Sir Topham Hatt smiled. "Thomas, you have saved the children's party," he boomed. "So today, that makes you the most reliable engine on the whole of Sodor." And later, Thomas had his most important job yet. As guest of honor at the children's party. There was lots of ice cream and plenty of cakes. Everyone had a wonderful time. The children cheered for Thomas. Thomas felt very proud. Mighty Mac.
And green and brown and blue, they're the really useful crew. All the different roles they play around taking the shed so far away. Down the hills and round the bends, Thomas and his friends. Thomas, he's the cheeky one. James, his fame but lots of fun. Percy, pulls a mail on time. Gordon, thunders down the line. Emily, really knows her stuff. Henry, toots and huffs and puffs. Edward, wants to help and share. Toby, well let's say he's square. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. All the two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. All the different roles that play around taking the shed so far away. Down the hills and round the bends, Thomas and his friends. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue, they're the really useful crew. All the different roles that play around taking the shed so far away. Down the hills and round the bends, Thomas and his friends.
Mighty Mac. It was summertime on the island of Sodor. Lots of vacationers were coming to the island. They liked to see the beautiful forests and the high mountains. It was a busy time for all the engines. A new engine had arrived on the island. He was going to help take the vacationers up into the mountains. Thomas had arrived at the transfer yards. He was very excited to meet the new engine. "Hello," puffed Thomas. "Hello," the new engine puffed back. "I'm Mighty." "And I'm Mac." "And together, we're Mighty Mac," they whistled happily. Thomas had never seen such an unusual engine before. Then the narrow gauge controller, Mr. Percival, arrived. "Mighty Mac, you ought to take some vacationers to the mountain campground," said Mr. Percival. Mighty Mac could see the vacationers. They were waiting on the platform. But there were lots of tracks between Mighty Mac and the vacationers. Mighty Mac didn't know how to get to the platform. "We've always worked in the shunting yard," moaned Mighty to Thomas. "How will we find our way over to the passengers?" groaned Mac. "It's simple," whistled Thomas. Look at where you want to go, then follow the track that will take you there. Mighty set off nervously. But as they puffed along the track, Mac thought his way was quicker. "This way," he said. "No, Mac," puffed Mighty, "it's this way." Soon they were puffing left and right, backwards and forwards. They were very confused. They even had a ride on the turntable. Then, at last, "We're here," puffed Mac. "Then why are the vacationers over there?" asked Mighty. "Because you didn't look where you wanted to go. You didn't follow the right track," said Mr. Percival sternly. The passengers were on board. Mighty Mac puffed through the countryside on the way to the campground. "We have to get there before dark," chuffed Mighty, "so we'll have to work extra hard." Then, in the mountains, there was a fork in the track. Mighty wanted to go left. "This way," he puffed. "No! Go the other way!" shouted Mac. But Mighty was already pulling them past the fork. Mac was cross. The next time they came to a fork in the track, Mac wanted to go the other way again. "This way!" he puffed, and he pulled Mighty back to the junction, and then pushed him back up the other line. Now Mighty was cross. They puffed through the mountains, and whenever they came across a junction, Mighty would push one way, then Mac would pull the other. The vacationers were having a very bumpy ride. They spilt their drinks and their donuts went flying. But Mighty Mac pressed on. Then there was trouble. They had arrived at a dead end. "For a picnic," said another. "This is your fault," puffed Mighty, and he pushed back towards Mac. "Yours," puffed Mac, and he pushed back even harder. The vacationers watched as Mighty Mac bumped backwards and forwards. "Stop!" called the vacationers. "You're going to cause an accident." But it was too late. Mighty pushed Mac as hard as he could, and the coach crashed into the rocks. First, one rock fell. Then another rock. Soon, lots of rocks came tumbling down. The track was blocked, and they were all stuck. "We'll never get to the campground now," moaned the vacationers. And it was all Mighty Mac's fault. They felt terrible. It was getting late. The vacationers were working hard. They were trying to get the coach back onto the rails. Then, with a mighty heave, the vacationers lifted the coach back onto the track. Mighty Mac was watching them. "When the vacationers work together," hooted Mighty. "They lifted the heavy carriage onto the track," tooted Mac. Then they had an idea. "If we both work together," puffed Mighty, "we'll be strong enough to push those rocks out of the way," huffed Mac. So Mighty Mac rolled up to the rocks and pushed and pushed. The rocks rumbled, and then they rocked until finally the track was clear. The vacationers cheered. Mighty Mac was ready to go. They could see the flag flying high above the campground. Then they remembered what Thomas had said. "Look where you want to go," puffed Mac. "Then follow the track that will take you there," chuffed Mighty. "Off we go!" they whistled together. Mighty Mac puffed up the mountains. And soon they arrived at the campground. The vacationers were very happy, and Mighty Mac was very proud. "You know, Mac," wheezed Mighty, "when we pull together and work together, we can be a very useful engine," whistled Mac. And they set off happily back down the mountain. Molly's Special Special.
He's the cheeky one. James. His vain but lots of fun. Percy. Pulls a man on time. Gordon. Thunders down the line. Emily. Really knows her stuff. Henry. Toots and huffs and puffs. Edward. Wants to help and share. Toby. Well, let's say he's square. They're 4, they're 6, they're 8. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All with different roles to play. Round in the sheds so far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and his friends.
Molly's Special Special. It was a blustery day on the island of Sodor. Thomas was excited. He was on his way to meet a new engine called Molly. She was waiting as he pulled into the yards. Molly was bright yellow. She had great big wheels and a shiny funnel. She looked very smart. "Hello," Thomas puffed cheerfully. "Hello," Molly chuffed back. Molly looked sad. "What's the matter?" asked Thomas. "Emily laughed at me because I have to take empty freight cars to the coaling plant," Molly puffed sadly. "I want to take full freight cars like a really useful engine." This made Thomas feel sad. How can I help Molly feel important, he thought to himself. Then he saw some tarps flapping in the wind. This gave Thomas an idea. "I know what we can do," puffed Thomas. Molly reversed the empty freight cars into a siding. Thomas asked Molly's driver to cover her freight cars with the tarps. "With your cars covered up, no one will know they are empty," puffed Thomas. "We can make everyone think you're carrying a special delivery." "Then I will feel important," Molly chuffed cheerfully. Later, when Thomas saw Emily at the station, he told her all about Molly's special. "What is it?" asked Emily. "Not telling," Thomas puffed. "But it's the most special of all." And every time Thomas saw another engine, he told them all about Molly's special. Soon all the engines were talking about Molly's special. They were excited, except Gordon. "It won't be as important as my express," Gordon huffed. Thomas was worried. How can I make Molly's freight cars look even more special than Gordon's express, he wondered. Later that evening, Thomas saw a station master lighting lanterns. This gave him another idea. "Can I borrow your lanterns?" Thomas puffed to the station master. "Of course," the station master replied. Soon, Thomas's trucks were filled with the lanterns, and he puffed away to find Molly. Soon, Molly's freight cars were decorated with the beautiful lanterns. She was taking the cars to the coaling plant for a very important job. "Your freight cars look very special now," puffed Thomas. "You must go through Abbey Station. Lots of engines will be there to see you." The lanterns on Molly's freight cars twinkled like stars in the night. When Thomas and Molly arrived at Abbey Station, Emily, Percy, and Gordon were waiting. Percy gasped. "Ooh! She looks magnificent," exclaimed Emily. And for the first time since she'd been on Sodor, Molly felt special. But not for long. A strong gust of wind blew one of the tarps into the air. "Oh no!" gasped Thomas. Now everyone could see there was nothing inside. "Those freight cars are empty," Gordon huffed. "I knew it couldn't be as important as the express." "So there isn't a special?" Percy puffed sadly. Molly felt silly and not very important at all. So she puffed away as fast as she could. Thomas felt very bad. Just then, Sir Topham Hatt called the station master. And the station master came to see Thomas. "There are lots of engines waiting at the coaling plant," the station master said. "They're waiting for Molly's freight cars." "Oh no," moaned Thomas. "I've got to find Molly quickly." Molly had stopped in a siding. She looked very sad. "I'm sorry I made you look silly," puffed Thomas. "But they are waiting for your empty freight cars at the coaling plant." "But I've nearly run out of coal," moaned Molly. "Don't worry," puffed Thomas. "I can help you get there." So Thomas pushed and Molly pulled. Thomas and Molly worked together. And they arrived at the coaling plant in no time at all. There were lots of engines waiting for them. They all needed the empty freight cars to start their nighttime deliveries. "Your empty freight cars were important after all," puffed Thomas. Molly felt so proud it made her axles tingle. "We need even more freight cars," chuffed Henry. "I'll get them," Molly chuffed cheerfully. "And I'll help," puffed Thomas. Molly filled up with more coal, then Molly and Thomas raced back to the yard. They collected some more empty freight cars, and they puffed quickly away. Gordon was stopped at a junction. His signal had turned to red. "Out of the way," puffed Molly. "Empty freight cars coming through?" "You see," laughed Thomas. "Sometimes empty freight cars are more important than your express." Gordon's face went as red as the signal. And Molly felt more special than special.
Toots and huffs and puffs. Edward wants to help and share. Toby, well, let's say he's square. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All the different roles that they're out in the sheds so far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and his friends. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All with different roles to play around in the sheds so far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and his friends.
Respect for Gordon. The engines of the Sodor Railway were always busy. Thomas puffed to the beaches with happy vacationers. And Gordon proudly pulled the express. Gordon thought he was the strongest, fastest, and cleanest engine on the whole of the railway. But one thing bothered him. His firebox rattled as it cooled down at night. Gordon knew his rattle stopped the other engines from getting to sleep. That night, Gordon's firebox went click, clunk, click, clunk. Thomas and Percy started to chuckle. "Rattler Gordon's keeping us all awake," peeped Percy. "The only engines keeping other engines awake," huffed Gordon crossly, "are little engines with very bad manners." But secretly he felt rather embarrassed. In the morning, Percy teased Gordon again. "Rattlebox is awake at last," he puffed out loud. Gordon ignored Percy. He did not like being called names. "I'm the strongest and the best," he told himself. "Strongest and best, strongest and best, cleanest and fastest, and pull the express." He wished the other engines would remember that. Later, Gordon pulled into Knapford Station. "Oh, look," laughed Emily. "Rattler Gordon's here. He's pulling the Click-Clunk Express." This made Gordon very cross indeed, especially because Diesel overheard. "I hope your Click-Clunk gets better soon," oiled Diesel. "See you later, Rattler." Gordon was very cross indeed. He decided it was time the other engines learned to treat him properly. So later at the water tank, he pulled up ahead of James. James was surprised. At Knapford, Percy had brought Gordon's coaches into number 1 platform. "Off you go now, Percy," said Gordon. "Number 1 is my platform. Little engines shouldn't hang around." "You're a boastful, bossy, big blue boiler," Percy muttered to himself crossly. Later, Gordon told his friends to give a polite toot-toot whenever they saw him. "But why?" asked Thomas. He was very puzzled. "Because," huffed Gordon grandly, "I'm the strongest and the best." And he steamed away. "You can toot at him if you like," wished Emily, "but I'm not going to." Gordon steamed across the island. He felt very pleased with himself. He was sure the other engines would forget his clunk-click and treat him properly now. He saw Emily coming. He listened for her toot-toot. But Emily didn't toot at all. This made Gordon very cross. He was so cross that he didn't see the signal telling him to stop. And he didn't see the goods train ahead until it was too late. Luckily, no one was hurt. But Gordon came off the rails and he was covered in gooey red jelly. Oh! As Gordon waited to be put back on the rails, Percy arrived. "Hello, Gordon," peeped Percy. "I see you're not the cleanest engine anymore." Then James puffed up. "I don't think you'll be pulling the express for a while, Gordon," joked James. Finally, Thomas arrived. "Gordon's a mess, Gordon's a mess. He's the largest and jelliest," puffed Thomas cheekily. At last, Gordon was back on the rails. He felt very foolish indeed. Edward pushed him to the fitter's yard. Gordon had to stay at the fitter's yard for a long time. It was hard to get the jelly out of his engine. Emily and Henry took in turns to pull the express for him. One evening at Tidmouth's sheds, Henry huffed, "It's hard work pulling the express." "Yes," agreed Emily. "Gordon must be very strong to pull the express so fast." "I miss Gordon," peeped Percy. "I miss having his rattle to go to sleep by." Gordon knew the other engines were pulling the express for him. "Thank goodness for Emily and Henry," he thought. "I'm sure they're doing a very good job." Finally, Gordon was as good as new. The fitters had even managed to fix the rattle in his firebox. That evening, Gordon had something to say. "Is it about being fastest and the best?" teased James.
Not at all, puffed Gordon. I know my rattle kept you awake at night, and I'm sorry. And I was also silly about the toots. I realize now that engines toot other engines because they work hard and deserve it, not because they ask for it.
"But we think you do deserve it, Gordon," said Thomas, "because you work hard and you are a really useful engine." All the other engines agreed. Now all the engines greet each other with a cheerful toot-toot for all the hard work they do on Sir Topham Hatt's railway.
He's the cheeky one. James. His fame but lots of fun. Percy. Pulls a mail on time. Gordon. Thunders down the line. Emily. Really knows her stuff. Henry. Toots and huffs and puffs. Edward. Wants to help and share. Toby. Well, let's say he's square. They're two, they're four, they're six. All the different roles to play round Tidmouth shed so far away. Down the hills and round the bends, Thomas and his friends. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All the different roles to play round Tidmouth shed so far away. Down the hills and round the bends, Thomas and his friends.
Thomas and the birthday picnic. All the engines on the island of Sodor were very excited. Sir Topham Hatt's mother was coming to the island to celebrate her birthday. "Shen Valley, sir," tooted Thomas quickly.
That is a very good idea, Thomas, beamed Sir Topham Hatt.
Later, Thomas puffed proudly into Knapford Station with Annie and Clarabelle. He was very excited. Sir Topham Hatt, Lady Hatt, and Sir Topham Hatt's mother were waiting in their best clothes. The station master loaded the picnic baskets, and the biggest birthday cake Thomas had ever seen. Thomas smiled, but Sir Topham Hatt's mother wasn't smiling. She looked very stern. She made Thomas feel nervous. Just then, Percy chuffed into the station. "You'll have a wonderful time," peeped Percy. Thomas stopped feeling nervous. This was going to be the best birthday picnic ever. Thomas whooshed and wheeshed through the countryside. Annie and Clarabelle clattered and chattered. Everyone was happy. Finally, they arrived at the beautiful Shen Valley. There were woods and streams and green fields. Thomas was sure Sir Topham Hatt's mother would like this. It was the perfect place for a picnic. Sir Topham Hatt, his wife, and his mother looked at the fields, but they didn't smile. The fields had just been plowed into thick brown mud. "Cinders and ashes!" cried Thomas.
"We can't picnic here," said Sir Topham Hatt sternly. "You'll have to have another idea. But hurry up, my mother's getting very hungry."
Thomas thought very, very hard, and then he set off. Thomas pumped his pistons even harder to get to the other side of the island. He was puffing to the castle. "This is my best idea yet," chuffed Thomas. At the castle station, Sir Topham Hatt spoke to the station master.
"Thomas," said Sir Topham Hatt, "the castle is closed for redecoration and repairs. Please have another idea and be quick about it."
So Thomas set off from the castle. He rocked and he rolled. He huffed and he puffed. Sir Topham Hatt, his wife, and his mother were bounced and bumped inside the carriage. Thomas went faster and faster. Ideas. Thomas hoped he'd have another idea before he got to Knapford. But as he pulled in, not one idea had dropped into his funnel. Sir Topham Hatt, his wife, and his mother got off the train. And with a low toot, Thomas chuffed sadly back to Tidmouth. When Thomas got back to the sheds, the other engines were waiting. They had heard that Thomas's good ideas had gone wrong. "Nothing went right," moaned Thomas sadly. "Don't worry," peeped Percy cheerfully. "I'm sure Sir Topham Hatt's mother enjoyed the cake." "The cake?" gasped Thomas. "I steamed off before they could unload it. Now Sir Topham Hatt's mother won't even be able to have her birthday cake." Thomas let out a big whoosh of steam. "Maybe, if I think hard enough," said Thomas, "another idea will come." "Of course it will," peeped Percy. Percy wanted to whistle cheerfully, but his whistle wasn't working. It was blocked with quarry dust. "Blow hard, Percy, like this," said Gordon, and he blew a long, low note. "I find 2 toots better," chirped Emily, and she gave 2 high toots. "No, no, no! Slow and strong is always best," tooted Henry. "That's it!" Thomas tooted. "Our whistles!" The other engines were puzzled. Thomas beamed. "I've had another idea!" Sir Topham Hatt, his wife, and his mother were sitting sadly in the living room when the station master rang. "You are all to go to Knapford Station. Thomas and the other engines have a special surprise." When they arrived at Knapford, they could hardly believe their eyes. There were banners and balloons and fine food and the birthday cake. Thomas gave 1 toot. Then, one after the other, the engines hooted and tooted, whistled and blew, "Happy birthday to you." And for the first time all day, Sir Topham Hatt's mother smiled from ear to ear. "This is the best birthday picnic ever," smiled Sir Topham Hatt's mother.
"Thomas," boomed Sir Topham Hatt, "this is your best idea yet."
Thomas was delighted. Tuneful.
And green and brown stands round the bend. Thomas and his friends. Thomas, he's the cheeky one. James, his fame had lots of fun. Percy, pulls the men on time. Gordon, thunders down the line. Emily, really knows her stuff. Henry, toots and huffs and puffs. Edward, wants to help and share. Toby, well, let's say
Tuneful toots. The little engines of the narrow gauge railway were always busy. They went uphill and downhill all day long. Rusty's favorite journey was by the lake. He liked to toot his horn there. The sound echoed around the hills. Rusty's horn was special. It had two notes, one high and one low. Rusty thought he had a very tuneful toot. But the other engines thought it was the worst noise they'd ever heard. And that made Rusty sad. One morning, the narrow gauge controller, Mr. Percival, had a special announcement to make. "Sir Topham and Lady Hat are to visit our railway this evening," he said grandly. "This is a very special occasion, so a brass band is coming to play for them," Mr. Percival added. The engines were very excited. But Rusty was most excited of all. He loved the sounds of a brass band. There was a lot to do. Skarloey and Rheneas brought tables and chairs. Duncan and Peter Sam brought apples and pears from the orchard. And Rusty was to take the brass band on a tour of the hills before the concert. When Rusty pulled into the transfer yards, Mr. Percival was waiting with the brass band. Rusty couldn't help but toot his horn, high and low. At that moment, Thomas chuffed into the transfer yards with the bandstand. "What was that wonderful sound?" puffed Thomas.
"That was Rusty," peeped Peter Sam. "He thinks his horn is special, but we don't."
"Well, I think it's special," wheezed Thomas. This made Rusty very happy. No one had ever liked his horn before. "Rusty, the brass band are ready for their tour of the hills," called Mr. Percival. "Yes, sir," hooted Rusty. The brass band was soon on board, and Rusty pulled quickly out of the station. "Don't be back late," Mr. Percival called after him. But Rusty didn't hear. He was tooting his two tones loud and clear. "I'm going to give the brass band the best tour ever," he said. Rusty took them to the top of the highest hill. Then they went to the viaduct. Then he took them to the trestle bridge. It would soon be time for the concert. The band started to tune their instruments. The sound of their notes filled Rusty's funnel. He was very happy. So happy, he forgot all about getting back for the concert. "I know," thought Rusty. "Now I'll take the band to the lake." He wanted this trip to go on forever and ever. Rusty happily clickety-clacked towards the lake. His horn was toot-tooting to the music of the brass band. He wished all the other engines could hear him now. The ruined castle looked magical in the sunset. Rusty's tuneful train crossed the lake. Then there was trouble. Rusty shuddered to a stop. Rusty had made a terrible mistake. He had gone too far, and he had run out of diesel oil. Now the brass band wouldn't get back for the concert. This was a disaster. Thomas chuffed into the transfer yards with Sir Topham Hatt and Lady Hat. Mr. Percival looked very unhappy. Rusty had not returned with the brass band. Everyone was very worried. The band leader was very worried too. "How will anyone know where we are?" he asked Rusty. Suddenly, Rusty tooted very loudly. "If you all play and I hoot my horn very loudly, Our sound will echo all the way down to the yards. Then everyone will know where we are." The band leader was happy. He waved his baton. "1, 2, 3, he called. The band started to play.
And Rusty tooted his two tones louder and prouder than ever before.
Thomas was the first to hear the sound. "That's Rusty," he puffed. "And the brass band," Duncan chuffed. Everyone listened. They could hear Rusty's two-tone horn echoing down the valley. "They must..."
"Band is with Rusty," said Sir Topham Hatt. "We'll have the concert there."
Everyone thought this was a wonderful idea, especially Mr. Percival. The brass band played as loudly as they had ever done. Rusty was sure the whole of Sodor could hear them.
Then he saw engine lamps coming towards them. Rusty was so surprised. All the engines were arriving at the lake, and none of them was telling him to be quiet.
"We have come to hear the concert," boomed Sir Topham Hatt.
"We heard your horn," puffed Peter Sam. "So we knew where to find you," chuffed Duncan. "Because you have the most special-sounding horn of all," wheezed Skarloey. "I shall never be shy about my special horn again," Rusty tooted.
"Let the concert begin."
All the engines blew their whistles, and Rusty tunefully tooted his two-tone horn loudest of all.
He's the cheeky one. James. His fame but lots of fun. Percy. Pulls a man on time. Gordon. Thunders down the line. Emily. Really knows her stuff. Henry. Toots and huffs and puffs. Edward. Wants to help and share. Toby. Well, let's say he's square. They're 2, they're 4, they're 6, they're 8. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All the different roles that play around timber sheds so far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and his friends. They're 2, they're 4, they're 6, they're 8. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All the different roles that play around timber sheds so far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and his
Edward. Rheneas and the Dinosaur. Rheneas and Skarloey. It was a bright, crisp winter's day on the island of Sodor. All the engines were hard at work carrying passengers and freight. Thomas was very excited. He had a special job to do. The toy shop was to have a grand opening for the winter holiday season. The workers at the toy factory had worked hard to make lots and lots of toys in time for the grand opening. Thomas's job was to take toys from the factory to the toy shop. It was hard work, but Thomas was enjoying it. He felt really useful doing something so important, and he was looking forward to seeing the children's happy faces. On the day of the grand opening, Sir Topham Hatt came to Tidmouth Sheds.
"A new machine for the toy factory has arrived," he said. "Henry, I want you to pick it up from Brendam Docks and take it to the factory as soon as possible. And while you are there, he added, you can take the last load of toys from the factory to the toy shop.
Thomas was disappointed. He thought that was his job. Maybe he could pick the children up after school. Thomas hurried off to start his new jobs. But he was very sad not to be helping with the grand opening. The signal at the next station was red. Thomas stopped. The station master was waiting for him with a message. It was from Sir Topham Hatt. "Emily has broken down," said the station master. "You must get all your jobs done as quickly as possible. Then you are to collect the children after school and take them to the toy shop." Thomas was sad for Emily, but excited to take the children. He puffed away quickly. There was a lot to do. Thomas was happy to be helping with the grand opening after all. He almost burst his boiler as he puffed around the island. At last, Thomas finished his jobs. He picked up Annie and Clarabelle and steamed off to collect the children. Thomas puffed through the docks. He was surprised to see Henry was still there. Then Thomas saw that Henry was trapped by a large crate. "What happened, Cranky?" asked Thomas. "That crate slipped off my hook," snapped Cranky crankily. Thomas was worried. Henry still had to collect the last load of toys from the factory for the toy shop. "What if the toys arrive late for the grand opening?" wished Thomas. "The children will be very disappointed." "I'll go as soon as the line's clear," puffed Henry. "I know," puffed Thomas excitedly. "I can collect the toys from the factory. Then I'll pick up the children." "You won't be able to pull all the cars of toys as well as Addie and Clarabelle," said Henry. "Don't worry," Thomas whistled. "I can do it." And he puffed quickly away. There was very little time left before the grand opening. Got to hurry, puffed Thomas. Doing our best, chanted Annie and Clarabelle. At last, Thomas reached the toy factory. He was coupled up to a long train of freight cars, and he set off for the toy shop. Thomas had been working hard all day, and he wasn't used to pulling such a heavy load. "It's very hard work," he puffed. You can do it, sang Annie and Clarabelle. Soon Thomas was steaming up Gordon's Hill. Must get to the top, he huffed. But he went slower and slower and slower, until eventually he stopped altogether. "I have to go on," wished Thomas, but he wasn't strong enough. The train started to pull Thomas backwards down the hill. He applied his brakes, but it didn't help. He slid. "What's the matter, Thomas?" Henry asked. Thomas told him. "You were right, Henry," he said unhappily. "This load was too heavy for me. I should have listened to you. And now I know I need your help." "What can I do?" chuffed Henry. "You take the freight cars to the toy shop," whistled Thomas, "and I'll pick up the children. But we must hurry." Henry chuffed as fast as he could to the toy shop. Thomas puffed around the island as fast as he could. The children cheered when they saw him coming. "You won't be late," he whistled as he steamed from station to station. And they weren't. Thomas arrived just in time for the grand opening. It was a magical sight. There were colored lights, balloons, and lots of toys. Sir Topham Hatt declared the toy shop open for the winter holiday season. Everybody cheered. Thomas was so pleased to see the children's happy faces. "You were right, Henry," Thomas tooted. "In future, I shall leave pulling the heavy loads to you."
He's the cheeky one. James. His fame had lots of fun. Percy. Pulls a mail on time. Gordon. Thunders down the line. Emily. Really knows her stuff. Henry. Toots and huffs and puffs. Edward. Wants to help and share. Toby. Well, let's say he's square. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All with different roles to play. Round in the sheds or far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and his friends. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All with different roles to play. Round in the sheds or far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and his friends.
Rheneas and the Dinosaur. Rheneas and Skarloey are the best of friends. They love working together. And they enjoy shunting freight cars. They biff them. And they bash them. All day long. That summer, some men from the Sodor Museum had found some very old bones. When they put the bones together, they made the skeleton of a dinosaur. That morning, a photographer arrived on the island to photograph the dinosaur. Thomas was to take him to the transfer yards. At the transfer yards, Mr. Percival was talking to his engines. "The dinosaur will soon be ready to go to the Sodor Museum," Mr. Percival said. "I will need 2 very careful engines to collect it." Rheneas and Skarloey were very excited. "We can be really careful," puffed Rheneas. "Watch." Rheneas shunted some freight cars gently together. But Skarloey was too excited to be careful. The narrow gauge controller was cross. "Rheneas and Skarloey, you are not careful engines," Mr. Percival said. "I will have to choose 2 other engines to collect the dinosaur." "But I can be careful," said Rheneas. "Let me try again, please." "Very well," Mr. Percival said. "But this is your last chance." "Thank you, sir," said Rheneas happily. Skarloey was sad. "I'm sorry I biffed the freight cars," he whistled quietly. "But I'm sure we could take the dinosaur together." "No," said Rheneas. "I'll show Mr. Percival I can do it on my own." And he steamed away. Later, Rheneas had to take some coal to the station houses. The cars were very heavy for him on his own. His pistons pounded, and his axles ached. But Rheneas kept going. "Must take the dinosaur. Must take the dinosaur," he puffed. Later at the transfer yards, Mr. Percival came to see Rheneas. "Rheneas, you have worked very hard today," said Mr. Percival kindly, "and pulled very heavy freight cars." This made Rheneas very proud. "So, I have decided you can collect the dinosaur," Mr. Percival added. But are you sure you can do it on your own?
Yes, sir, I'm sure, whistled Rheneas. He was very happy.
And Skarloey, called Mr. Percival, you will collect empty freight cars from the timber yards. Yes, sir, peeped Skarloey sadly. He watched Rheneas race quickly away to collect the dinosaur. Rheneas chuffed cheerfully through the mountains. But when Rheneas arrived to collect the dinosaur, he was surprised. The dinosaur was very, very big. But Rheneas was sure he was strong enough to pull it. He coupled up to the flatbed and pulled with all his puff. He started to puff his way back to the yards. Rheneas blew his whistle as he puffed through Middle Station. Everyone thought the dinosaur skeleton was wonderful. And they all gave Rheneas a big cheer. Rheneas was very proud. It was too heavy. His puff was going, and his pistons could hardly pump. Rheneas puffed slower and slower. Then he rolled back down the hill. He could go no further.
Oh, no, he moaned. I'll never get the dinosaur to the transfer yards now.
Rheneas felt terrible. Then he remembered his friend.
I wish Skarloey was here to help me, he sighed.
Skarloey was still on his way to collect freight cars from the timber yards. As he came around the bend in the line, he was very surprised to see a dinosaur blocking the track.
Out of my way!
Skarloey tooted loudly. Rheneas heard Skarloey.
Skarloey, he cried, I need your help. The dinosaur is too heavy for me. I can't pull it on my own.
Skarloey was still upset with Rheneas. He didn't want to help.
I was silly to think I could pull this on my own, puffed Rheneas sadly. It needs 2 engines, and I need you. From now on, I'll always want us to work together.
That made Skarloey feel much better, and he buffered up to the flatbed to help his friend. Together, they pushed the dinosaur safely up the hill and all the way back to the yards. Rheneas and Skarloey puffed happily into the transfer yards, just as Thomas arrived with the photographer. Rheneas and Skarloey had their picture taken with the dinosaur to be friends again, and they both agreed that working with your friend is the best job of all. Thomas and the New Engine. The trains on the island of Sodor keep very busy. There are always lots of jobs to do. One morning, Sir Topham Hatt came to Tidmouth Sheds. "A new engine has arrived on the island," he announced. "His name is Neville. You must all make him feel welcome. A happy engine is a useful engine." Later, Thomas was stopped at a signal. The signalman called down to Thomas. "The bridge ahead is unsafe. Thomas, you ought to collect a piece of ironwork so the bridge can be repaired." "Yes, sir," huffed Thomas. At the yards, Harry and Bert were with Neville, the new engine. Neville was a steamy, but he had a square body like a diesel. Neville was backing up towards some trucks. "Nearly there," said Harry cheekily. "Nearly there," said Bert naughtily. Then there was trouble. "Watch where you're going, clumsy wheels," Harry and Bert laughed. Neville looked sad. "It's not our fault if you're a silly steamy," oiled Bert, and they laughed even harder. Thomas arrived at the yards. He could see Harry and Bert laughing with Neville. That must be the new engine, he thought. He must be friends with the Diesels. Thomas arrived at Knapford Station. "Have you seen the new engine yet?" asked James. "Yes," said Thomas, "but we'd better be careful. I saw him at the yards with Harry and Bert. They were laughing together." James was shocked. A steamy, friendly with Diesels? As Thomas left, Edward pulled in. "Have you heard about the new engine?" snorted James. And he started to tell Edward all about Neville. Later, Edward was taking on water. He was talking to Percy. "That new Stevie Neville is best friends with the Diesels," Edward puffed. "He doesn't want to be with Stevies at all." "How do you know?" peeped Percy. "James told me and Thomas told him," whistled Edward. Later, Percy met Emily at a red signal. "Don't go near Neville, the new engine," he told her. "The Diesel—" "Edward told me. James told Edward, and they heard all about it from Thomas." When Thomas arrived at Abbey Station, Sir Topham Hatt was there. "Thomas, you must warn all engines not to cross the bridge until it's repaired," he boomed. Thomas felt proud. It was a very useful job. Just then he heard a whistle. Someone was coming. Thomas had to warn them. It was Neville, pulling Annie and Clarabelle. Thomas was shocked. Annie and Clarabelle were his carriages. "Hello," puffed Neville cheerfully. "I'm not talking to you," Thomas huffed crossly. Neville didn't know what he had done. Then Emily pulled in next to Neville. "Hello," said Neville happily. Emily let out a whoosh of steam. "It's no use trying to make friends with me. I know you're going to biff into all the steamies, just like Harry and Bert told you to." Thomas was surprised, but the station master blew his whistle, and Neville puffed sadly away. "Where did you hear that Neville is going to biff into all the steamies?" Thomas asked Emily. "Don't you know?" Emily whistled. "Percy told me, Edward told Percy, James told Edward, and you told James," huffed Emily. "But I only said to James that I'd seen Neville with Harry and Bert." Then Toby arrived. "Have you heard about Neville, the new engine?" he puffed. "Henry saw Harry and Bert be horrible to him at the yards." Emily was shocked. Thomas couldn't believe it. Neville wasn't friends with the Diesels after all. Where was Neville going, Emily tooted. Cinders and ashes, cried Thomas. Neville's heading for the broken bridge. I must stop him. Neville was speeding through the countryside as fast as he could. Suddenly, Neville saw a barrier on the track. He slammed on his brakes. But it was too late. Neville was in terrible trouble. He was on the broken end of the bridge. Thomas knew it was all his fault. Suddenly, he had an idea. Thomas steamed slowly and carefully onto the bridge. He gently bumped Clarabelle and was coupled up. Thomas was very scared. Slowly and steadily, he began to pull Neville back from the edge. The bridge made a creaking noise. Thomas knew he must hurry. He pulled as hard as he could, and with one big puff, he pulled Neville's wheels off the bridge. Thomas had done it. He had saved Neville and Annie and Clarabelle. Thank you, whistled Neville. I should have warned you, puffed Thomas, but I was too busy believing silly stories. I thought you didn't like steamies, but now I know I was wrong. Thomas gave Neville a long, friendly toot-toot. Neville was very happy. At last, he knew he had a good friend in Thomas. Toby feels less.
Green and brown and blue, they're the really useful crew. All the different roles that play around in the shed so far away. Down the hills and round the bends, Thomas and his friends. Thomas, he's the cheeky one. James, his fame had lots of fun. Percy, pulls a man on time. Gordon, thunders down the line. Emily, really knows her stuff. Henry, toots and huffs and puffs. Edward, wants to help and share. Toby, well, let's say he's square. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue, they're the really useful crew. All the different roles to play around in the shed so far away. Down the hills and round the bends, Thomas and his friends. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue, they're the really useful crew.
Toby feels left out. It was springtime on the island of Sodor. All the engines were working hard in the sunshine. One morning, Sir Topham Hatt arrived at Tidmouth's sheds. He had some exciting news. The new Sodor Museum opens soon, he announced. Lots of very important people will be coming to the island for the grand opening. What's a museum? Asked Percy. It's a place where they put old things so people can stand and look at them, huffed Gordon. I want you all to look your best, so everyone is to have a repaint. All the engines were very pleased. Later that morning, Toby met James at Knapford Station. Have you heard about the opening of the new museum, puffed James? We're all having a repaint. I shall look wonderful with a brand new coat of red paint. I've not heard about that, said Toby. Why hasn't Sir Topham Hatt told me? You must have been left out, chuffed James. And he steamed away. That night, Toby couldn't sleep. He kept worrying about what James had said. Why hasn't Sir Topham Hatt told me about the museum, he wondered. Why have I been left out? By the next morning, Toby thought he knew the answer. He met Thomas at Abbey Station. "Have you heard about the museum?" asked Toby. "Yes," puffed Thomas excitedly. "We're all being repainted." "I'm not," puffed Toby sadly. "But I think I know why. I am a very old steam tram. Maybe Sir Topham Hatt has decided to put me inside the museum." Thomas wasn't so sure. "Why don't you ask him?" huffed Thomas helpfully. Toby looked worried. He was frightened of what Sir Topham Hatt might say. "Must go," puffed Thomas. "Really useful engines are really busy ones." And he chuffed away. Toby thought for a moment. "I'll show Sir Topham Hatt that he can't put me in a museum," said Toby. "I'll show him I'm a really useful engine." Toby arrived at Tidmouth's sheds. Sir Topham Hatt was talking to Emily.
Emily, you must go to the yard for your repaint, said Sir Topham Hatt.
Emily was very happy.
Another engine must collect your flour, said Sir Topham Hatt.
"I'll do it, sir," said Toby quickly.
Thank you, smiled Sir Topham Hatt.
And before he could say anything else, Toby steamed off. He didn't want Sir Topham Hatt to tell him he was going to be put in a museum. Toby waited impatiently at the flour mill. Hurry up, he wheezed. "I must get to the docks as soon as I can." When Toby delivered the flour, he saw Sir Topham Hatt standing on the dockside. He was talking to the dockmaster. Sir Topham Hatt saw Toby. He wanted to speak to him, but Toby steamed off as fast as he could. Later, Toby saw Thomas again. He was pulling Annie and Clarabelle. "I'm off for my repaint," chuffed Thomas happily. "I can pull Annie and Clarabelle for you," said Toby. "Thank you, Toby," tooted Thomas. So Toby pulled Annie and Clarabelle on Thomas's branch line. And while James was getting a shiny new coat of red paint, Toby collected coal cars from the mine for James. And while Percy was having his repaint, Toby shunted freight cars full of stone in the quarry for Percy, even though it was dusty, dirty work. At last, Toby had finished. He was very tired and very dirty. Suddenly, he saw Sir Topham Hatt waiting by the track. Toby still didn't want to speak to Sir Topham Hatt. Quickly, he reversed into a siding. I didn't see that a big rock had fallen on the line. "Bust my cowcatchers!" he cried. Luckily, no one was hurt. But Toby's axle and his cowcatchers were broken. He couldn't move. Sir Topham Hatt hurried over.
Why have you been running away from me all day? He asked.
I don't want to be put in a museum," Toby said sadly.
Why would I do that, Toby? Asked Sir Topham Hatt.
"Because a museum is full of old things, and I'm an old steam tram, and I'm not really useful anymore."
Sir Topham Hatt smiled. Toby, you may be old, but you are far too useful to be put in the museum. You have worked harder today than any other engine. And as Sodor's only steam tram, I have a very special job for you. First, you will have a special polish. Then, you are to take all the visitors to the museum for the grand opening. Toby felt very happy. He let out a great wheeze of steam. I've been trying to tell you that all day, added Sir Topham Hatt. Toby smiled. He felt very silly. So Toby's axle and cowcatchers were repaired, and then he was polished until he looked as good as new. On the day of the museum opening,
Toby picked up the visitors at the docks and puffed them steam tram on the island of Sodor.
He's the cheeky one. James. His vain but lots of fun. Percy. Pulls a mail on time. Gordon. Thunders down the line. Emily. Really knows her stuff. Henry. Toots and huffs and puffs. Edward. Wants to help and share. Toby. Well, let's say he's square. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All the different roles to play round timber sheds or far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and his friends. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All the different roles to play round timber sheds or far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and his friends.
Thomas tries his best. A carnival was coming to the island of Sodor. All the engines were very excited. James took the carousel. Edward and Henry took the Ferris wheel. And Percy took the bumper cars. But Thomas was the most excited of all. He couldn't wait for the carnival to open that afternoon. He was looking forward to seeing the children's happy faces. He loved hearing their cries of laughter as they rode on the Ferris wheel. But that afternoon, Sir Topham Hatt gave Thomas a new job. He was to collect some chickens from a country station and take them to the docks.
I am relying on you to deliver the chickens safely, Thomas, said Sir Topham Hatt.
Yes, sir, puffed Thomas. Thomas was sure he could get the job done in time to go and see the carnival. But he was surprised to find the station empty.
Farmer McColl's truck has a flat tire, said the station master. He'll be here as soon as he can.
Thomas waited and waited, but Farmer McColl still did not arrive with the chickens.
What's wrong, Thomas?
Asked James.
You don't look at all happy.
I'm going to miss the carnival unless Farmer McColl comes soon, huffed Thomas. James thought Thomas was silly to wait.
I've just come past the carnival, he said excitedly. All the children are arriving. You could rush over there and back before Farmer McColl arrives.
That's a good idea, tooted Thomas. He was sure he could steam to the carnival and back again really quickly. But as he hurried to the carnival, Thomas started to worry. What if Farmer McColl arrived at the station and I wasn't there? What if the signal held me up on the way back? Sir Topham Hatt would be very cross if I was late. I mustn't let Sir Topham Hatt down, said Thomas to himself, and he hurried back to the station. Thomas knew that this job was going to take a long time. He might miss the carnival after all. At long last, Farmer McColl arrived with the chickens. and Thomas was on his way. At the next station, Thomas told Gordon the whole story.
You wouldn't have a problem if you were an express engine,
Huffed Gordon.
You'd go really fast and get the job done in double-quick time, like me. I'll be in time to see the carnival.
At that moment, the signals turned to green, and Gordon raced off. I can go fast too, tooted Thomas, and he steamed off after Gordon. I will see the carnival. I will see the carnival, he huffed and he puffed as he sped down the track. Gordon's next signal was green. He dashed through it, but Thomas's signal turned red. Thomas screeched to a halt. The chickens in the vans flapped and squawked crossly. Thomas remembered that his job was to give them a safe and comfortable ride. Going fast was the wrong thing to do. So Thomas puffed along slowly and carefully. But he was sad. It was getting late, and the carnival was already well underway. At last, Thomas reached the docks. The chickens were safe and sound, but it was very late. Now Thomas knew he wouldn't get to see the children at the carnival. He couldn't have felt sadder. Then the dock manager told Thomas there was an emergency. "The generator at the carnival has broken down," he said. "So there are no lights, and all the rides have stopped working." "The children will be very sad," tooted Thomas. "Cranky has just unloaded a new generator," the manager told Thomas. "You must take it to the amusement park." The generator was heavy, but Thomas was determined to get it to the carnival as quickly as possible. He wanted everyone to have fun again. As he pulled into the station, Thomas saw crowds of children on the platform. All the children cheered when they saw Thomas.
Well done, Thomas, said Sir Topham Hatt. You have been a very useful and reliable engine.
Soon the new generator started and the amusement park lit up again. Back to life. Thomas felt so proud, and he gave a long toot as he watched the children having a wonderful time at the carnival. The Magic Lamp. Narrow gauge engines work very hard. They puff and chuff all day, up and down the hills. One day, the winding gear that carried coal cars up and down the incline broke. The engines had to work extra hard, pulling heavy coal cars up and down the long, steep track, until at the end of the day, they could ease their aching axles. That evening, Thomas puffed into the transfer yards. All the narrow-gauge engines were there. Thomas was delivering steel winches and wires to repair the broken incline. "Listen, Thomas," hooted Rusty. "Skarloey's telling us a story from the hills." "Long, long ago," began Skarloey, "there was an old engine called Proteus. His lamp was so bright, you could see it for miles around. Proteus said it was a magic lamp. He promised that if any engine ever found the lamp, their wishes would come true." "How would you know it was Proteus's lamp?" asked Duncan. "First, you feel a rush of wind whenever the lamp is near," Skarloey chuffed quietly. "Then you hear a strange creaking sound. And finally," he added, "you see it flicker on and off and on." Peter Sam huffed loudly. "I don't believe there's a magic lamp." Soon all the steel winches and wires were loaded into Peter Sam's freight cars. "I have work to do," huffed Peter Sam. "I'm a really useful engine, not a really silly one. The incline must be working by morning, so I won't be wasting my time looking for a silly magic lamp," he tooted proudly, and he steamed quickly away. The moon was bright. Peter Sam huffed and puffed. "The magic lamp I know isn't true. It's just an old story, and quite silly, too." Peter Sam clickety-clacked towards a junction. Suddenly, he felt a great rush of wind. His axles rattled and his couplings creaked. "What's happening?" Peter Sam whistled. He was so surprised he puffed right past the junction and up the wrong line away from the incline. Peter Sam still didn't believe Skarloey's story about Proteus's magic lamp, but then he heard a creaking sound, and his wheels began to wobble. Up ahead, a light flickered off and on and off, and then he saw it. It was just the fogman's lantern. It creaked and croaked as it swung outside his cabin. Peter Sam felt better. He chuffed past. Peter Sam was now even further from the incline. "The magic lamp I know isn't true. It's just an old story, and quite silly, too," he huffed quietly to himself. Then, suddenly, there was another rush of wind. Then, a creaking sound. And finally, a flickering light. On and off and on. The wind, the creaking sound, and the flickering light. Could it be Proteus's lamp, thought Peter Sam? Then he saw it. It wasn't Proteus's lamp. It was the light from a campfire at the children's campground. And it was the trees that were creaking in the wind. "I knew that all along," sighed Peter Sam, but now he chuffed on even more slowly. Peter Sam was at the bottom of a steep hill, and now he was completely lost. He didn't know what to do. "I wish I could find the incline, and I wish I could be safe at home in the sheds with the other engines. And I wish," Peter Sam puffed quietly, "I wish I could find Proteus's lamp. Perhaps then my wishes would come true." Suddenly, he felt a rush of wind whip round his wheels. Then he heard the strangest creaking, croaking sound. And then he saw a flickering light that flashed on and off and on. It came from the top of the hill. Peter Sam gasped. It must be Proteus's magic lamp. He knew he had to go up the hill and find it. The wind whirred and stirred. Sam puffed to the top of the hill. And there was Harold the helicopter. His blades made a wind that whirred and stirred. The sound whooshed and wheeshed as the blades spun around. And Harold's bright light flickered on and off and on. To the hill farms. What are you doing? I'm lost, Peter Sam said, and I'm going to be very late to deliver the winches and wires to the incline. No problem, old buddy. I'll show you the way. And Harold took to the air. His strong light shone brightly and showed Peter Sam the right way to the incline. Later, on his way home, Peter Sam couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Maybe, puffed Peter Sam quietly, you don't have to see the magic lamp for your wishes to come true. Maybe it's enough just to believe in it.
He's the cheeky one. Jane. His fame had lots of fun. Percy. Pulls a man on time. Gordon. Thunders down the line. Emily. Really knows her stuff. Henry. Toots and huffs and puffs. Edward. Wants to help and share. Toby. Well, let's say he's square. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown. They're the really useful crew. They're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All with different roles to play. Round in the sheds so far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and his friends.
Winter was coming to the island of Sodor. The leaves had fallen from the trees, and fog rolled over the countryside. One chilly morning, Sir Topham Hatt came to Tidmouth Sheds. He had a special announcement to make.
A statue is to be put up at Peel Station, he said. It will celebrate the Sodor Railway.
The engines were very excited. Thomas was to collect the statue from Brendam Docks. I wonder what it will be, peeped Percy. As soon as I find out, puffed Thomas, I'll come back and tell you. And he steamed away. But when Thomas arrived at the docks, Cranky was still unloading the statue. Hurry up, Cranky, said Thomas. I want to be the first to see it. Cranky didn't like being rushed.
Why are you so excited to see the statue? You think it's going to be of you?
He scoffed. Thomas didn't say anything. He was too busy watching the workmen open the crate. The statue was covered by a large waterproof sheet. It had a very familiar look. There was a tall funnel shape at the front, and then a wide shape at the back. The shape was just like Thomas's shape. Suddenly, Thomas was very excited. Perhaps, he whistled, it really could be of me. That night, Thomas couldn't wait to tell the other engines about his statue. But when he arrived at the sheds, all the engines were asleep. Thomas was too excited to sleep. He beeped his whistle to wake Percy up. Percy, Percy, I think the statue is of me, boasted Thomas. Really, Thomas? Yawned Percy. That's nice. It will be wonderful to have my very own statue, tooted Thomas. He couldn't wait for morning to come. The following day, Sir Topham Hatt told the engines they were to go to the washdown. All except Thomas. He was to collect more things for the statue. First, Thomas went to Wellworth Station. He was to collect a special block for the statue to stand on. Are you looking forward to seeing my statue? He called to Edward. It might not be your statue, huffed Edward. But Thomas wasn't listening. Thomas arrived at Maithwaite Station. He had to collect a special podium for Sir Topham Hatt to stand on. Look, Thomas cried to Emily. Sir Topham Hatt will make a speech when they uncover my statue. Who says it's going to be your statue? Emily huffed. You'll see, said Thomas, and he wheeshed away. Percy arrived as Thomas's trucks were being unloaded. Thomas started to talk to Percy about his statue again. Please stop talking about the statue, peeped Percy. Thomas was surprised. No one wants to hear about it anymore. No one wants to talk to you anymore, Percy added crossly. And neither do I. Thomas was left all alone. No one was talking to him. Thomas felt very sad. Thomas steamed toward Tidmouth Sheds. It had started to snow heavily, but Thomas kept going as fast as he could. He had to try to put things right with his friends. But when he arrived at Tidmouth, Sir Topham Hatt was there. He looked worried. The tracks to Peel Station are blocked. None of you will be able to get to the ceremony, he said sternly. I'll clear the tracks, tooted Thomas. I don't want any of you to miss the party. The other engines were very surprised. They knew Thomas didn't like wearing his snowplow, and clearing the tracks would make Thomas late to see his statue. But Sir Topham Hatt was pleased. You must work very hard, Thomas, he boomed. There's a lot to do. Thomas steamed off. He could not let them down. Thomas felt silly for showing off. No wonder no one was talking to him. There was still a lot of tracks to clear. Thanks to Thomas, everyone was able to get to Peel Station. They gathered nearby. The statue was covered in snow, but the sun had started to shine, and the snow began to melt. Sir Topham Hatt told everyone how proud he was of all his engines. But the engines were still thinking about Thomas, and they were still cross. Just then, there was a loud slooshing noise. A big patch of snow slid off the statue. Then another. Then another. The last of the snow fell to the ground. The engines were so surprised. That's not Thomas, gasped Gordon. No, it's of all of us, peeped Percy. Everyone was very excited. Then Thomas pulled up. He was very surprised when he saw the statue. "It's not of me at all," he cried. Thomas was very relieved and very happy. "I'm very sorry that I made you all so cross," he puffed. "I think this statue of us all is the best statue that could ever be." And all the engines agreed.
The cheeky one. James. His fame had lots of fun. Percy. Pulls a man on time. Gordon. Thunders down the line. Emily. Really knows her stuff. Henry. Toots and huffs and puffs. Edward. Wants to help and share. Toby. Well, let's say he's square. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All the different roles that play around timber sheds so far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and round the bends. Thomas and his friends.
All the engines on the island of Sodor were very excited. There was to be a great banquet at the Scottish castle. Henry loved going to the Scottish castle because on the way he puffed past his favorite tree. The tall pine tree towered above the rest of the forest. Henry always stopped to look at it. Seeing the tall pine tree standing tall and proud made Henry very happy. Henry arrived at the Scottish castle. Sir Topham Hatt was waiting for him. "The castle's flagpole is old and about to break," he said. "Henry, I need you to collect a new flagpole from the docks in time for the banquet." "Yes, sir," puffed Henry. When Henry puffed into the docks, he couldn't see the tall flagpole anywhere. He looked around for something tall. He looked above the coal cars, but there was nothing tall there. He looked at an old ship. It had a tall mast. Then Henry looked up and saw Cranky. Cranky was very tall, but Henry didn't see the flagpole. It was on the flatbed in front of him. It rolled onto the track. "Oops, sorry, matey," called Salty. "I didn't expect to see the flagpole down there," puffed Henry. "It's not tall when you lay it down, matey," said Salty. Henry felt very silly. Soon Sir Topham Hatt arrived. "This is a disaster," he boomed. "The Scottish castle will not look the same without its flagpole." Henry was very sad. It was all his fault. "Maybe seeing the tall pine tree will cheer me up," Henry huffed. But nothing could make Henry feel better. "I wish I hadn't broken the flagpole," Henry sighed to Toby. "They could make a new flagpole out of that tall tree," Toby puffed. Henry looked up at the tall pine tree. He didn't want it to be made into a flagpole. The next morning, Henry had to take some workmen to the forest. But the workmen were carrying axes and saws. "Oh no," moaned Henry. "They must be going to cut down the tall pine tree." Henry puffed through the countryside. Must save the tree, must save the tree, he puffed. Then Henry had an idea. He didn't take the workmen to the forest. He went to look for a new flagpole. Henry saw some children waving flags, but those flags were much too tiny to have flagpoles. There was a flagpole holding up a windsock at the airfield, but that flagpole was much too short. There was a tall flagpole on the beach, but it wasn't tall enough. Bother, wheezed Henry sadly. None of the flagpoles is as tall as the pine tree. Now I'll never save it. That evening, Sir Topham Hatt came to see Henry at the sheds. Henry, those workmen had a very important job to do. You have caused confusion and delay, Sir Topham Hatt said sternly. Tomorrow, you will collect coal, and Edward will take the workmen to the forest. The next day, Henry was collecting the coal when Thomas arrived. I can't find another flagpole, moaned Henry. I've looked everywhere. Sometimes the thing you want is somewhere you wouldn't think to look, puffed Thomas. Sadly. Then Henry looked in the orchard. But only Trevor was there.
Hello, Henry.
Hello, Trevor. You're very nice, puffed Henry, but you wouldn't make a very good flagpole. Ship's mast, asked Henry.
It's to be chopped up and used for firewood, me hearty,
said Salty. But it will be perfect for the castle flagpole, Henry chuffed.
Then you best take it quickly, matey,
said Salty. Cranky soon lowered the mast onto the flatbed. And Henry raced off to the forest. He had to get to the tree before they cut it down. When Henry pulled into the forest, the tall pine tree was still there, and so was Sir Topham Hatt. Please don't cut down the tall pine tree, sir, chuffed Henry. I think this ship's mast would make a very good flagpole. I would never cut the tall pine tree down, said Sir Topham Hatt. The workmen are only here to collect some firewood. We always have a roaring fire at the Scottish Castle banquet. Henry was so happy it made his axles tingle. That night the flag was hoisted on the... except for the tall pine tree.
Hablemos del salario.
¿Qué es lo que ofrecen normalmente por eso?
Medal time. Gordon thunders down the line. Emily really knows her stuff. Henry toots and huffs and puffs. Edward wants to help and share. Toby, well, let's say he's square. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful
Emily knows best. One day, Emily was dropping visitors at the ruined castle. Once upon a time, a queen had lived there. I'd like to be a queen, thought Emily. Queens are in charge and tell everybody what to do. Down the hill from the castle, Toby and Percy arrived. They were to shunt freight cars. Percy had never worked there before. "Ooh, look at the castle," peeped Percy excitedly. "I wonder who used to live there."
A king and queen, said Toby. They ruled the island and told everyone what to do.
And he chuffed towards the freight cars. Percy stared at the castle. He was dreaming of kings and queens.
"Percy," called Toby, "come along. We've got a lot to do today."
Waiting for passengers is boring, puffed Emily. Then she remembered that Toby and Percy were working near the castle. It would be much more fun to visit them, she said. Toby and Percy were waiting to be coupled up when Emily chuffed in. She was very excited about the castle. "Percy," she whistled, "I've had an idea. Let's play a game." Percy looked pleased. "I'll be queen, and I'll tell you what to do today," she said. "It'll be fun." Percy liked the idea of having fun. But Toby thought Emily's idea was silly.
"You have to be clever to be a queen," he said wisely, "and know the right thing to do."
"I always know what to do," huffed Emily. Toby laughed. That made Emily cross. "I'll show Toby that Queen Emily knows best," she wished. Toby was now coupled up to his freight cars. Percy thought his looked like troublesome trucks.
"Don't worry," said Toby. "I'll be back soon. If you can't manage the troublesome trucks, wait for me and I'll tell you what to do."
And Toby steamed slowly away. The troublesome truck started to moan and groan.
"No, you don't."
They clattered and chattered. Percy knew they were going to be trouble. Emily had been watching Percy. "If I want to be a queen, I must tell Percy what to do," she thought, "because I know best." Percy was shunting the troublesome trucks as hard as he could, but they wouldn't move. They were being very difficult. Emily chuffed to a halt. "Percy," she whistled loudly, "I am the queen today. I will tell you what to do." Percy was worried. Toby usually knew best. "Take these troublesome trucks along my track," said Emily. "It's faster, and they won't complain. Toby will be pleased when he sees how quick you are." Percy wanted Toby to be pleased. "I'll do as you say, Queen Emily," he tooted. Emily was pleased with herself. She watched as Percy blew a big whoosh of steam. Percy puffed, and he chuffed, and the troublesome truck sped off. Emily let out a whoosh of steam. She did know best. But suddenly, there was a terrible noise. As the dust cleared, Emily saw what had happened. The troublesome trucks had run into Mavis, who was waiting on the track. Luckily, no one was hurt, but her load of stone had spilled all over the lines, and one of the freight cars had come off the rails, knocking over a telephone pole.
"Percy!" cried Mavis. "You're not supposed to be on this track."
Emily was shocked. Then there was another loud crash. It was Toby. His wheels had struck the telephone pole and he was derailed. He couldn't move, I can't be a queen. I don't know what to do. I don't know best. Toby was right. She came to a halt at Maithwaite Station. She told the station manager what had happened. Quickly, he phoned for help. Soon, Toby had been lifted back up onto the rails. He wasn't hurt, but his cowcatchers would need to be repaired. Emily chuffed into the shunting yards. Sir Topham Hatt was very cross.
Emily, he boomed, you have caused confusion and delay. Luckily, Toby knew what to do, he added sternly.
I'm sorry, Emily said. Knowing the right thing to do isn't as easy as I thought, she chuffed. In future, I'll leave that job to a king or a queen. Or to Toby.
He's the cheeky one. James. His fame had lots of fun. Percy. Pulls a man on time. Gordon. Thunders down the line. Emily. Really knows her stuff. Henry. Toots and huffs and puffs. Edward. Wants to help and share. Toby. Well, let's say he's square. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All with different roles to play. Round timber sheds or far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and his friends. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All with different roles to play. Round timber sheds or far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and his friends.
Thomas's day off. More than Topham Hatt came to Tidmouth Sheds. He had important news.
A new diesel engine has arrived on the island, he boomed. His name is Dennis. You must all help him to get to know the Sodor Railway. And Thomas, added Sir Topham Hatt, you have been working very hard. Today, you can have a day off.
Thomas was very pleased. First, I will have a long washdown, Thomas chuffed cheerfully. Then I shall go to Bluff's Cove. On his way to the washdown, Thomas saw a diesel he had never seen before. The diesel was huffing and puffing. Hello, Thomas tooted. You must be Dennis. What's the matter? These troublesome trucks are too troublesome. I can't shunt them. It's my day off, whistled Thomas, but I'll help you. This made Dennis very happy. Dennis watched Thomas biff and bump the troublesome trucks into line. All done, puffed Thomas. It was hard work, and he was tired. Thank you, Thomas, oiled Dennis, and he watched Thomas chuff away. Soon, Thomas was covered in bubbles. Shiny and bright, that's what I'll be to start my day right, he chirped cheerfully. Dennis wasn't cheerful. Dennis was lazy. He didn't want to deliver his freight cars of tiles. Then he saw Thomas. Dennis had an idea. He would ask Thomas to help him again. Help! Help! Dennis called weakly. Thomas slowed down. I don't know how to get to the schoolhouse, Dennis groaned. Don't worry, Dennis, Thomas puffed. I'll show you the way. Dennis smiled. His trick had worked. So Thomas showed Dennis the way to the junction. The schoolhouse is further along that track, wheezed Thomas. Dennis watched Thomas puff away. Dennis had wanted Thomas to take his freight cars for him. Suddenly, Dennis had another idea. He blasted his horn again. Then again. Thomas heard the noise. He was worried. Dennis watched Thomas come back. His new trick had worked. Now Dennis would pretend to have something wrong with him. Help, Dennis cried. I'm overheated. You'll have to shunt those freight cars for me. Thomas knew it was his day off, but he still wanted to help. Don't worry, puffed Thomas. I'll find another engine to help you. On my way to Bluff's Cove. Dennis was cross. He wanted Thomas to shunt his freight cars. Dennis decided to leave his freight cars. Then another engine will have to take them, he thought. So Dennis raced away. He didn't care about the tires. He didn't care about Thomas. All he cared about was getting far away from his work. His wheels were spinning faster and faster. Then there was trouble. Help, called Dennis. Help! Help! But this time, there was no one there to help. Thomas arrived at a signal. Percy had some important news. The workmen are waiting for Dennis to bring the tiles to repair the school roof. The children can't go to school until it's mended. And no one knows where Dennis is, Percy added. I do, wheezed Thomas. He's broken down. I must go back to help him right away. Thomas quickly found Dennis. Thomas was very surprised. I thought you broke down at the junction, wheezed Thomas. And where are the freight cars of tiles? Dennis looked very shamefaced. I tricked you, said Dennis quietly. There was nothing wrong with me at the junction. I just didn't want to pull those heavy freight cars. I'm a really lazy engine, moaned Dennis. Dennis's wheels wobbled, and his diesel oil dripped. Now Thomas could see that Dennis really was in trouble. So Thomas decided to help one more time. I'll pull you back onto the tracks, Thomas puffed. Then I'll be your back engine. That way we'll get the tiles to the schoolhouse in double quick time. Dennis smiled his biggest smile ever. Dennis and Thomas finally pulled into the schoolhouse station. Sir Topham Hatt was waiting. Dennis, you have caused confusion and delay, he boomed. Dennis felt bad. Thomas has shown me that being a really useful engine is much better than being really lazy, Dennis wheezed. Sir Topham Hatt was pleased. Thomas was pleased too. Thank you, Thomas, Dennis hooted. From now on, I will try to be a really useful engine.
Toots and huffs and puffs. Edward wants to help and share. Toby, well, let's say he's square. They're 2, they're 4, they're 6, they're 8. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown
Thomas's new trucks. It was a busy, bustling day on the island of Sodor. The engines and their freight cars were working very hard. Thomas was shunting freight cars in the yard, but his cars were old and rusty. It was very hard work. Then James arrived.
Look, James puffed proudly. Sir Topham Hatt gave me some smart new freight cars. They're much nicer than yours.
It's not fair, moaned Thomas. I want new cars too. The next morning, Sir Topham Hatt had a surprise for Thomas.
Thomas, your trucks are getting too old for your heavy loads. You ought to have some new ones, just like James.
Thomas was delighted. Thomas collected his new freight cars and puffed proudly away. But when Thomas arrived at the docks, there was James. He was showing his new freight cars to Bill and Ben. "I've got new freight cars too," puffed Thomas.
They're even nicer than James's, puffed Bill and Ben.
"Your freight cars may be nice and new now," huffed James, "but you'll never keep yours as clean as mine." "Yes, I will," chuffed Thomas. "I'll have the cleanest freight cars on the island." James watched Thomas puff away. The next day, Thomas puffed into the quarry. James's cars were already loaded.
I've got my stone already, boasted James, and not a spot of quarry dust on me.
"I can do that too," pouted Thomas. So Thomas backed under the hopper. But just as the stone was released, Thomas's freight cars chuckled. Then they rolled a bit more. "Bother," huffed Thomas.
Ha! Puffed James. Your cars don't look so new now.
Thomas was cross. Thomas puffed to the coaling plant. "This time, behave yourselves," Thomas snapped. "I want you to stay clean." When he arrived, Thomas backed carefully and slowly under the coal hopper. But the freight cars chuckled. Then they rolled too far again. Thomas and his freight cars were dirtier than ever. Later, when Thomas arrived at the washdown, there was James.
See? I have got the cleanest freight cars. You'll be here for hours getting yours cleaned, laughed James.
Thomas was very cross. The next morning, when Thomas puffed into the yard, he had an idea. "If I use my old trucks to take the coal," he puffed, "my new freight cars will still look clean and new." So Thomas backed up to collect his old trucks. He collected some coal from the coaling plant. Then he raced across the countryside.
Ha! laughed Thomas. I can get these trucks really messy and get the coal to the docks on time.
Then there was trouble. The rusty coupling broke. Thomas's trucks were rolling by themselves. "Cinders and ashes!" cried Thomas. Thomas applied his brakes, but he stopped too quickly. The trucks bumped into the back of Thomas, and the coal spilled all over the tracks. Thomas was stuck. Soon, Sir Topham Hatt arrived on Harvey.
Thomas, these trucks are too old for pulling coal, Sir Topham Hatt said sternly. And now you have caused confusion and delay.
"Sorry, sir," said Thomas. Harvey and the workmen soon cleared the tracks. But Thomas still had to deliver the coal to the docks. So he raced back to the shunting yards. And this time, he collected his smart new freight cars. Harvey and the workmen loaded the coal into Thomas's freight cars. The new cars were soon filthy, but they were filled with coal and ready to go. And they were very happy. Thomas raced to the docks. Suddenly, the trucks weren't being troublesome. They rolled easily up hills. They rattled quickly down hills. And they sang all the way. Thomas raced into the docks. "We need to unload quickly," the dock manager called. "But don't worry, we'll try and keep your new freight cars clean." "That's okay," puffed Thomas. "My freight cars would rather be useful than clean." Just then, James puffed into the docks. "Look at your freight cars," boasted James. "Filthy again, not like mine." James tried to pull away, but his troublesome trucks didn't want to be clean anymore. Hold back, they chuckled. Just then, Cranky's cable snapped. He dropped a large crate of melons. "Bother!" puffed James. "James," tooted Thomas, "I think freight cars like to be useful rather than clean." And all the trucks agreed.
He's the cheeky one. James. His fame had lots of fun. Percy. Pulls a man on time. Gordon. Thunders down the line. Emily. Really knows her stuff. Henry. Toots and huffs and puffs. Edward. Wants to help and share. Toby. Well, let's say he's square. All there for the 6 or 8. Different roles to play around in the shed so far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and his friends.
Duncan and the Old Mine. He was going to take a party of vacationers to see Coldy Caves. But Mr. Percival, the narrow-gauge controller, had some bad news. "The machines at the main coaling plant have broken down. Sir Topham Hatt needs coal until they are mended." Mr. Percival told Duncan and Rusty to bring coal down from the mine in the hills. "Then Thomas will take it to the coaling plant," he said. "And," Mr. Percival added, "Bertie the bus will take the vacationers to Coldy Caves." Duncan was very disappointed. He wanted to go to the caves. Pulling coal cars wasn't an exciting job at all. As Duncan was puffing slowly to the mine, he noticed an old line branching off into the trees and bushes. "That looks like a good place for an adventure," said Duncan excitedly. "I wonder what's down there." Duncan pushed his way through the barrier. Rusty was coming down the hill with freight cars full of coal. He stopped when he saw Duncan. "Look what you've done, Duncan," he hooted. "Why did you break through the barrier?" "I wanted an adventure," Duncan wished quietly. "This isn't the time for an adventure," tooted Rusty. "We've got work to do." But Duncan didn't want to pull coal cars anymore. All he could think about was having an adventure. So he puffed further down the line. Duncan clattered along the old line. Finally, the line disappeared into the side of the mountain. It looked like the entrance to an old mine. "This is better than caves any day," he told himself excitedly. And he puffed inside, collapsed behind his side. Duncan was too excited to think clearly. He puffed straight into a roof support. And suddenly the roof collapsed behind him. Duncan was trapped. "Oh no," Duncan wished. "How am I going to get out?" Back at the transfer yards, Thomas was dark and lonely in the old mine. Duncan, he looked up at the shafts of light. "Maybe if I whistle, someone will hear me." Duncan whistled as loudly as he could, but there was no reply. He tried again, even louder. "I'll have to find my own way out." Inch by inch, Duncan crept further into the mine. It was dark in the tunnel, and getting darker. Then suddenly he bumped into a set of buffers. Duncan could go no further. Now he was scared. "I'm going to be stuck here forever," he whistled sadly. Rusty arrived at the broken barrier. Perhaps Duncan went looking for an adventure after all, he thought. Soon, Rusty came to the collapsed entrance. "Duncan must be inside," he cried. Rusty was very worried. Duncan was still trapped. He puffed nervously backwards and forwards. He biffed into the buffers again. This time, he heard a squeaking noise. "I know what that is," he thought. "It's the sound of wheels going round." Duncan edged forward very slowly. He hit the buffers again and pushed them carefully. They moved, and as they moved, the wheels squeaked. Duncan hadn't hit buffers after all. He had run into some freight cars. If there are some freight cars on this track, he thought, maybe it leads somewhere. He pushed the cars slowly forward along the track. Soon he saw a light at the end of the tunnel. But the way out was boarded up. Must think clearly, he huffed to himself. Then he had an idea. With all his puff, Duncan bashed the freight cars. And they crashed and smashed through the boards. Duncan was free. "I did it!" he hooted happily. Rusty heard the crashing sound. He hurried on to see what it was. Soon he found Duncan. "Where have you been?" he cried. "I had an adventure," puffed Duncan happily. "And look what I found." Rusty could hardly believe it. Duncan was pushing cars full of coal. Duncan and Rusty raced the freight cars down. Thomas was very happy to see them, and so was Mr. Percival. Duncan told Mr. Percival all about his adventure. Mr. Percival told Duncan some good and some not so good. Rusty and Thomas agreed. "And next time I have an adventure," whistled Duncan, "I will know to think clearly all the time."
He's the cheeky one.
It was almost summer on the island of Sodor. All the engines were busy. They were looking forward to the start of the holiday season. One morning, Sir Topham Hatt came to the sheds.
It's time to get the seaside station ready for the summer visitors. Thomas, you are to pick up the deck chairs and windbreaks and take them to the beach.
Yes, sir, tooted Thomas. And he hurried off happily.
You're looking very cheerful, Thomas,
Wailed Diesel. Thomas told Diesel all about his exciting job.
Haven't you heard about the curse of the cliffs?
Wailed Diesel. No, tooted Thomas nervously. Diesel snorted.
Whenever the first engine of the holiday season goes around the headland, a terrible fog comes down over the cliffs.
Thomas didn't like the sound of that at all.
The engine loses its way, and nobody knows where it goes.
Diesel chugged away, leaving Thomas very unhappy indeed. He wished that he could wheel slowly along the track. He was very worried. Finally, Thomas reached the supply shed. Workers had loaded his freight cars with windbreaks and deck chairs. Thomas puffed slowly on his way. He was thinking about the curse of the cliffs. Suddenly, he saw Harold the helicopter. Harold had bad news. "Thick fog rolling in on the headland," Harold shouted. "Puff carefully, Thomas." And Harold whirred away over the treetops. Thomas was very scared now. "What if what Diesel said about the curse of the cliffs is true?" tooted Thomas. "I could get lost in the fog and never be seen again." Thomas puffed fearfully towards the cliffs. Thomas was approaching a tunnel when he saw Ben. Ben looked unhappy. "What's the matter?" asked Thomas kindly. "I was enjoying myself until I met Diesel," said Ben unhappily. "He told me a monster lives in the tunnel. Now I'm too scared to go through." "I'm sure Diesel can't be right about the monster," Thomas said. "Why don't I go into the tunnel first? Then you can follow me." Thomas puffed slowly into the tunnel. He heard a strange noise. Must be brave, he told himself. Thomas was determined not to show Ben he was frightened. He screwed up his courage and puffed slowly on. Then the noise grew louder and louder. And suddenly Thomas saw two eyes peering at him. Now he knew that Diesel was right. "Bust my buffers," wished Thomas. "There is a monster." Thomas wanted to go back, but he couldn't. He had to help Ben. Must be brave, he chanted. Thomas had to go forward. But as the smoke started to clear, Thomas saw that the eyes weren't eyes at all. They were lights. And the thud, thud, thud wasn't a noise made by a monster. It came from a machine beside the track. It was a generator to power the lights. Then Thomas saw picks and shovels. He realized that workmen must be Thomas tooted to the workmen happily. Ben was also very relieved. "You're a very brave engine," said Ben. "Now I can finish my job." And he puffed away. Thomas was happy to help Ben. Then he remembered that he still had to get to the beach. And he began to reverse away monster in the tunnel, maybe he'll be wrong about the curse of the cliffs, he puffed. He started to go forward again. I'm not afraid, he chuffed, as he steamed carefully through the mist. Suddenly, the mist rolled away, and the sun came out. Thomas saw that the cliffs were beautiful. Diesel just wanted to frighten me, Thomas whistled. Soon, the seaside station was up ahead. At last, Thomas reached the station on the other side of the headland. Thomas knew that soon the beach would be filled with happy vacationers. I should not have believed what Diesel said about the curse of the cliffs, wished Thomas. In future, Thomas decided he would believe in himself.
He's the cheeky one. James. His vain but lots of fun. Percy. Pulls a mail on time. Gordon. Thunders down the line. Emily. Really knows her stuff. Henry. Toots and huffs and puffs. Edward. Wants to help and share. Toby. Well, let's say he's square. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All the different roles that play around timber sheds so far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and his friends. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All the different roles that play around timber sheds so far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and his friends.
Skarloey the Brave. Skarloey loves to puff through the hills on the island of Sodor. His favorite place is a pretty village high up in the mountains. But in the winter, the mountain village gets very cold. So it's important that the engines deliver coal to the village. The houses must be cozy and warm. One morning, Rheneas was delivering his empty freight cars to the incline. The winch brings empty cars up the incline and lowers full cars down to be delivered to the villages across the island. Rheneas was frightened of the incline. It was very high. So Rheneas shunted his cars into place, and then he backed away quickly.
You are such a scaredy engine, laughed Skarloey. I'm not scared of anything.
Skarloey thought he was the bravest engine in the world. But then, the winch's coupling broke. Oh no! Skarloey steamed away as fast as he could. Skarloey raced right past Thomas, who was waiting on the main line. Skarloey switched tracks, and the cars rolled right past him. But they were heading straight for Rusty. Rusty hooted loudly to the signalman, who changed the points. Soon the narrow gauge controller, Mr. Percival, arrived. "Well done, Rusty," Mr. Percival said. "You are a really—"
I want to be the bravest.
puffed Skarloey.
How can I prove I'm the bravest?
He puffed to himself. Suddenly, Skarloey had an idea.
If I went up the hill on the winch,
He puffed.
then everyone will see how brave I am.
The winch hooked onto Skarloey's freight car coupling. Skarloey was still coupled up, but he didn't tell the workmen. Slowly, Skarloey was pulled up the hill. When Rheneas and Duncan arrived at the bottom of the incline, they gasped.
Look where Skarloey is.
Puffed Rheneas.
That is the bravest thing to do.
Chuffed Duncan. Duncan cheered and Rheneas blew his whistle. Skarloey felt prouder than ever.
Look at me! Look at me! He puffed.
At last, Skarloey reached the top of the incline.
I'm the bravest engine in all the world, he called.
But Skarloey was too heavy, and the winch broke. Whee! Puffed Skarloey as he raced down the hill. But when he got to the bottom, he couldn't stop. Skarloey raced all the way to the transfer yards. He raced past a very surprised Thomas and straight into the snowbank. Mr. Percival was very cross.
Skarloey, you have broken the winch, he said. The mountain village will get no coal today, and it's very cold.
Skarloey felt very bad.
There's only one thing to do.
He puffed.
I will have to collect the coal myself.
Skarloey arrived at the top of the incline and found Rheneas and Duncan had brought the supplies to repair the winch.
Are you going to take the freight cars down the incline without the winch?
Asked Duncan excitedly.
That would be really brave,
Chuffed Rheneas. Skarloey wanted to show Rheneas and Duncan how brave he was, but then he thought of the mountain village. So he puffed slowly and carefully back down the steep track. No one was there to see him working hard. No one cheered. It was late when Skarloey arrived at the village station. Cheered and cheered and cheered. Skarloey was so proud it made his axles tingle.
This is much better than showing everyone how brave I am.
He puffed. And it certainly was.
He's the cheeky one. James. His fame but lots of fun. Percy. Pulls a mail on time. Gordon. Thunders down the line. Emily. Really
Saving Edward. It was summertime on the island of Sodor. All the engines were working hard, carrying goods and passengers. They cheerfully chuffed up and down the lines. All except Edward. It felt worse today.
Thomas, you ought to go to the docks and shunt Edward's freight cars. After that, you can carry on with your usual jobs.
Yes, sir, said Thomas eagerly.
Papa had to.
Edward followed slowly to the docks. Edward was very worried. Had shunted Edward's freight car. Must keep going, he wheezed fearfully. But the train hardly moved at all.
I'm sorry, Thomas,
Edward wheezed miserably.
I'm not a really useful engine anymore. So Topham Hatt will have to send me for scrap.
Thomas was very upset. He wanted to help Edward. I'll do my other jobs first, Thomas said. Then I'll pull the train for you. Edward watched Thomas puff away. He wasn't sure if it was right to let Thomas do his job. Edward felt he had time to pull Edward's train. Hurry up! Hurry up! When Thomas finished all his jobs, he puffed back to collect Edward's train. Edward was very pleased to see him. Don't worry, Edward, puffed Thomas. I'll have your job done in no time. You go back to Tidmouth and I'll meet you there later.
Thank you, Thomas,
wheezed Edward. And Thomas pulled away with a long line of freight cars. Thomas was tired. He had been working all day, and Edward's train was very heavy. But he was determined not to let Edward down.
Where is Edward?
The Topham Hatt. And then,
About the wrong sort of coal.
puffed Gordon. Edward looked puzzled.
The wrong sort of coal?
Gordon told Edward all about Thomas and Sir Topham Hatt. Edward felt very bad. He wanted to put things right. He decided he must go and see Sir Topham Hatt straight away. Edward hissed and wheezed his way to the station. His fire felt feeble. His wheels felt weak, but he battled on. At last, Edward puffed into the station. He found Sir Topham Hatt.
It's all my fault, sir,
He said sadly.
I asked Thomas not to tell you I couldn't work. I was afraid of going for scrap. I'm very sorry. I should have talked to you this morning.
You should always tell me if you have a problem, said Sir Topham Hatt. You are a loyal, hard-working, and really useful engine. I will send you to the fitters' yard straight away from
Thomas, I'll do my extra work, but they both agreed, even when it's hard. It's always best to tell the truth.
Toby, well, let's say he's well. 30 there, 4 there, 6 there, 8. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. And green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. Hauling different roles, so they're routing the sheds so far away. Down the hills and round the bay. Thomas and his friends.
Thomas and the Golden Eagle. To Tidmouth Sheds,
a golden... Percy, you are to collect milk from the dairy,
said Sir Topham Hatt.
and Thomas, you are to collect stone from the quarry.
It must reach Brendam Docks before the boat sails. Sir Topham Hatt left. Thomas and Percy were disappointed. I wish I was taking the bird watchers, Percy said sadly. And I wish I could see the golden eagle, huffed Thomas, as he set off. Thomas arrived at the quarry. There were freight cars of stone as far as the eye could see. Cinders and ashes, gasped Thomas. But he soon buffered up and puffed slowly away. Thomas had to stop at the junction to Bluff's Cove. Percy was waiting there. They both watched as Emily cheerfully chuffed past. Her cars were filled with happy bird watchers. I wish I could go up to Bluff's Cove, Percy puffed. Then Thomas had an idea. Percy liked ideas. My train is long and heavy, puffed Thomas. If you take half of my freight cars to the docks before you go to the dairy, I can go and find the Golden Eagle. Percy listened carefully. Then I will collect the other half of my freight cars, and it will be your turn to go and see the eagle. Percy thought this was a grand idea. Thomas shunted his freight cars into the siding. It will be quicker to take half of the freight cars to Brendam Docks, Thomas said happily to Percy. And he headed for Bluff's Cove. Percy buffered up to the train and puffed slowly away with half of Thomas's freight cars. Thomas arrived at Bluff's Cove in no time at all. He waited and waited. He was sure the Golden Eagle would come. But the Golden Eagle was nowhere to be seen. Thomas was disappointed. Then Bertie the bus pulled up. The Golden Eagle has been seen on Gordon's Hill, he called. How exciting! I must get there right away, cried Thomas. And he set off for Gordon's Hill at once. Thomas was so excited about seeing the Golden Eagle, he couldn't think of anything else. He forgot about the freight cars full of stone. And he forgot about Percy. Percy had taken half of Thomas's freight cars to the docks. Now he headed for the dairy to deliver the milk. He was happy. He'd have time to see the Golden Eagle. But when Percy passed the siding near Bluff's Cove, he was surprised to see Thomas's half of the freight cars still there. If the boat sails without them, Thomas will be in trouble, worried Percy. Percy decided to help his friend. Percy buffered up to the long line of freight cars and slowly puffed away. Percy got to the docks just in time. The quarry wagons were uncoupled, and Percy set off again for the dairy. He was feeling very tired. Thomas was feeling full of puff. He wheeshed happily up Gordon's Hill. He was sure now he would see the Golden Eagle. Thomas watched and waited. Waited and watched. But the eagle didn't come. I'll never see the Golden Eagle, Thomas said sadly. Suddenly, Thomas remembered his cars of stone. And Percy. Cinders and ashes, he cried. And he steamed off to the siding as fast as he could. And he had not taken the milk to the dairy. Thomas realized that now. The Golden Eagle has been seen back down the line, he called. Hurry, Thomas! But Thomas knew what he must do. I must take the milk to the dairy, cried Thomas. Just in time, slowly to the cold people. But on the way, they were astonished to see there, high on the rocks, not one, but 2 golden eagles. Thomas and Percy watched the 2 beautiful birds, and they both happily agreed.
Down the hills and round the bends, Thomas and his friends. They're 4 different roads to play around, changing sheds so far away. Down the hills and round the bends, Thomas and his friends.
Keeping up with James. It was winter holiday season on the island of Sodor. No holiday party at Knapford. All the engines wanted to take the presents train. It was the jolliest train of the year.
James, you must work with Edward, he said. Remember, the tracks are icy and you must all work together and take care.
But James wanted to finish first and take the presents train.
An old blue slow coach like you is sure to slow me down, he huffed.
James and Edward's first job was to clear the lines to Knapford. Edward worked as fast as he could, but it wasn't fast enough for James.
Hurry up!
He snorted. Henry was clearing the line when James steamed quickly past.
Slow down, cried Henry, and take care!
But James wasn't listening. He was dreaming about the presents train. He didn't notice that the tracks were icy. James' wheels began to slip and slide.
Whoa! He cried.
He was going faster and faster. Yippee! Called James. He was starting to enjoy himself. He was sliding so fast that he slid all the way into Maithwaite Station. Later, James and Edward had to take some coal cars to the coaling plant. James waited for Edward. He listened to the choir and watched all the colorful decorations being put up. James wanted to take the presents train more than ever. Finally, Edward puffed in.
Trust a blue engine to be late,
Called James. I'm sorry, gasped Edward. I had to go slowly and take care.
Slow engines like you don't get to pull a presents train,
Snorted James. James reached the top of Gordon's Hill. The tracks were icy and James started to speed up. Edward wasn't happy. James's wheels started to slip and slide.
Whee! Cried James. This is the way to get the job done fast.
James thought it was the best slide ever. At the coaling plant, James and Edward's train had been filled with coal. Edward called to James.
You must slow down and take care.
I am taking care, replied James.
Taking care to finish first.
I'm going to fast, James. But he didn't know he could.
Whoa!
Edward tried to brake as well, but it was too late.
Bust my buffers, cried James. Oh dear, wheezed Edward.
Sir Topham had arrived on Salt. He was very cross.
James and Edward, he boomed, the tracks were icy and you were not taking care. You have caused confusion and delay.
James felt bad.
Edward wanted to slow down, but I wanted to go fast so that I could pull the presents train.
You won't be doing that now, James, said Sir Topham Hatt. Edward, you are a reliable engine. You can pull the presents train, but you can't pull it alone. It's a very long train.
Sir, called James, if I promise to go slowly and take care, can I be Edward's back engine?
Sir Topham Hatt wasn't sure. Only if you can puff slowly and carefully, he said. James felt pleased.
Edward, he puffed, I will learn to take care just like you.
And so, later at Brendam Docks, the two engines collected the presents train and set off carefully for Knapford. Whenever they came to some icy track, Edward called out, "Slow down!" And now James slowed down. And when they went down Gordon's Hill, Edward called out, "Apply your brakes, James!" And James applied his brakes. So slowly and safely, the two friends puffed into Knapford Station. When the children saw the presents, they cheered and cheered.
Thank you, James, called Edward.
"Thank you, Edward," said James. "You are a really useful blue engine."
You know what's smart? Truffle butter.
He's the cheeky one. James. His vain but lots of fun. Percy. Pulls a man on time. Gordon. Thunders down the line. Emily. Really knows her stuff. Henry. Toots and huffs and puffs. Edward. Wants to help and share. Toby. Well, let's say he's square. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All the different roles to play round Tidmouth sheds so far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and his friends. They're two, they're four, they're six, they're eight. Shunting trucks and hauling freight. Red and green and brown and blue. They're the really useful crew. All the different roles to play round Tidmouth sheds so far away. Down the hills and round the bends. Thomas and his friends.
Flower Power. It was Halloween night on the island of Sodor. The moon shone brightly, and the stars twinkled in the night sky. The children's Halloween party was over. But while the children slept, all the engines were kept very busy. Thomas was alone at Tidmouth Sheds when Sir Topham Hatt arrived. He was still in his Halloween costume. "You ought to collect flour from the mill and take it to the bakery," he boomed. "You must work with Diesel. The island needs its morning toast, and Lady Hatt and I need our English muffins," he added sternly. "So I'll have no mishaps tonight." Thomas didn't want to work with Diesel, but he wanted to be really useful. When Thomas arrived at Brendam, he couldn't see Diesel at all. Diesel was up to his old tricks.
He rolled up behind Thomas and went, boom!
Whoa!
Trust a silly old steamy to be scared on Halloween, Diesel sneered.
I'm not a scared engine, said Thomas firmly.
We'll see, oiled Diesel.
Thomas and Diesel headed for the flour mill. Diesel teased Thomas with every click and every clack. When they arrived at the woods, Diesel cried,
It's the haunted forest!
and he called out,
Whoa!
Thomas, in a spooky voice. Stop it, said Thomas crossly. But the breeze blew, and the branches creaked. Diesel's teasing made it seem spooky indeed. Then they came to the abandoned mine. The buildings were deserted, but they could hear a banging noise. What was that? Cried Thomas.
Sounds like the ghost engine looking for a steamy to scare.
Well, I'm not scared, said Thomas. But he wished he felt as brave as he sounded. Thomas and Diesel had to stop at a red signal. It was next to a twisty old tree. The wind whistled and Thomas heard a strange cry. Suddenly, Thomas felt something touch his tender.
Look out, cried Diesel. The ghost engine is after your funnel.
Cinders and ashes, gasped Thomas. And he let out a frightened peep.
Scared engine,
Diesel teased. Thomas was very cross with Diesel. He wanted to pay him back for all his teasing. Thomas and Diesel arrived at the flour mill. Thomas rolled up to collect the flour. Then Thomas had an idea. We'll see who's a scared engine, he puffed. Thomas biffed the freight cars out of the way and rolled up under the chute himself. When Thomas puffed out the other side, he was covered from dome to buffer in pure white flour. Whoa, he said spookily.
It's a ghost engine,
Cried Diesel.
It's come to get me.
Stop, cried Thomas. It's just me. But Diesel was nowhere to be seen. After Diesel had gone, the mill seemed very quiet. But there was still work to do. The island needs its bread, thought Thomas, and Sir Topham Hatt needs his English muffins. Thomas shunted all the freight cars into one long line, and he set off for the bakery, all alone. As Thomas arrived at the twisty tree, he wished he could go faster, but it was a very long train, and he had to go slowly. Because he was going so slowly, Thomas could see that the tree wasn't spooky at all. It was just a tree, he gasped, and the strange cry was just an owl. Thomas was relieved. Thomas chugged towards the abandoned mine. He could still hear the spooky banging. He looked to his left and then to his right, and he saw what was making the noise. It's just an old door, he gasped. The wind is making it crash. Finally, Thomas reached the old woods. The breeze still blew, and the branches creaked. Thomas took a big, brave puff. But without Diesel's teasing, Thomas could see the haunted forest was actually Henry's favorite forest. It's not scary at all, said Thomas. Thomas arrived at the bakery. He was tired but happy.
Oh, it's the ghost engine, sir, Diesel told Sir Topham Hatt. And it's come to get me! It's not a ghost engine, boomed Sir Topham Hatt. That's Thomas. He's a really useful engine. Thomas, you have done a splendid job, Sir Topham Hatt said. You deserve an extra special washdown.
Thank you, sir, puffed Thomas proudly. And while Sir Topham Hatt waited for the first batch of English muffins, Thomas looked forward to telling his friends his Diesel Halloween story.